for being the kind of parent that is keen to know and understand more and more about our kids. So my name is Heather Clayton. For those of you that are new, I'm the Director of Learning here at St. Michael's University School, also a parent of 3. And I have a bit of a confession. Last session that we did October 1st, it was on the 3 F's of failure. How many of you were at that session? A good number of you. Okay, so here's what I know. I spoke that talk, and then 2 out of my 3 kids had scenarios in the next 2 weeks where they were just like, it was all a mess. And I had this experience of trying to do what I said at the session and still that pull of a parent, because we talked about how important it is for our kids to have these moments of struggle and to try to, I mean, depending on where they are at on the age and the learning and development continuum, to work that through and to learn from that. And we talked about grit and perseverance and those sorts of things. And so I was noticing as I was chatting with my son who's in Ontario saying, Mom, I want to drop a course. And my husband and I going, really? A course? You play varsity rugby? Yeah, I know, it's tricky. So just those conversations, right, where you're talking. And so I guess what I'm saying to you as we get started tonight is that I come to you as an educator, but I also come to you as a parent. And while we have this amazing vision of who we want to be and what we want to do as parents, the living that out day to day is challenging. And so what we try to do in these sessions is create a bit of a sacred space where we can come together, reflect, think about some ideas, talk to people around us, our community, and go away better for that experience, knowing that we're all kind of in the same boat. We all want the best for our kids. And so hopefully that's what we'll do tonight. So since we did failure already, we've decided to move on to success. We think that would be a good way to go. So what are we hoping to do tonight? What I'd like to do with you is look at and explore brain research, and particularly we're going to focus a lot on Carol Dweck's research. She was mentioned in the book we did last time by Paul Tuff, and I think it's a deepening of those ideas that we're going to look at. And then we're going to consider how, she speaks about fixed and growth mindset, and so we're going to consider how we can encourage these mindsets in our own children. And so what we try to do, for those that are new, is we sort of try to do a combination of things. What I know about brain research is if I talk at you for an hour, you won't learn as much as if you have a chance to talk and we do some little video clips and dialoguing and that sort of thing. So we try to model the kinds of learning experiences we're offering our kids in a session like this. So I want you to just breathe deep. We had this in the last session, but we're in a stress-free zone here. And just allow yourself to relax and enjoy what it is we're going to explore together. So the very first task I have for you actually it's the first page of your handouts. So this is called an anticipation guide. And again, from a brain research perspective, we really like to get our brains thinking about things before we actually do the learning. It's like opening a bit of a file drawer and making space for new learning. What I'd like you to do is in the before column, not the after column, there are some statements down the middle. And it's not necessarily that they're right or wrong, it's just your opinion or your impression. So the first one is, your intelligence is something very basic that you can't change very much. If you agree or disagree with that, circle it, whichever one fits for you. So I want you to do all 6 of those in the before column. If you've done that anticipation guide, you may be twitching by now because you're reading these phrases and you're going, but I think, so it's good. It's good to just kind of think about things and wonder whether that you agree or disagree and where you stand. I'm going to be sharing tonight with you Carol Dweck's theories about fixed and growth mindset. And she's been doing research for about 30 years. She's a professor of psychology at Stanford. Her work is pretty well known and has been published in the form of sort of books and accessible material for about the last 5 years or so. One of her books that's best known is called Mindset, and we're actually going to have a draw for that book tonight, so that's kind of exciting. She's also one of 6 Stanford professors who were just named this past May as members of the National Academy of Sciences. Very well respected. And so she has looked at this idea of fixed and growth mindset. What I'd like to do tonight, I'm just going to share a little excerpt with you of Carol Dweck talking about the advantages of a growth versus fixed mindset. Then we're going to look a bit at brain research, because you kind of need to understand a little bit about that to think about how it fits with fixed and growth mindset. Then we'll look at the theory and some strategies. So that's 3 ideas really that she presented there that we'll come back to, but I think it's kind of important to highlight about a growth mindset. She talked about it, you move to a learner focus, you move away from trying to just look smart to actually learning. You also believe in and understand the value of effort. It's kind of important, and that when you're making mistakes, they're just an inevitable part of learning and growth. So we'll come back to those theories, but I kind of just wanted to frame our evening with that, her words, her work. So I want to now just give a couple of, a few minutes to looking at the science of our brains and why it is that Carol Dweck has landed where she has. So if we think about our brains, the main brain cell that grows, there are 2 types, but the main one is called a neuron, and it looks something like this. It has all of the various bits. It has dendrites or pathways which grow. You have the signal moving through the neuron, across a synapse to another neuron. And this is the root. This is how we are developed, how we think, how our body responds. All of these actions and reactions happen through the dendrites in our brain. This is a very Reader's Digest version of the brain. An interesting writer, Caffeine Unleashed, she comes to us out of the States, an educator who's done a lot of work on the brain. And it's from her book that I took those pictures, a Charlie Brown Christmas tree neuron versus the mighty oak neuron. And really what she's saying is, as we move through our lives, particularly ages 0 to 19, we're growing all sorts of these pathways in our brain. And every time we have a new experience or we do something different, we grow more brain pathways. And that helps to thicken the gray matter, which is in our brains. And it also helps to allow us to embed and get better at certain things that we work on. We grow more brain cells than our brain can have. And so there's this survival thing that goes on where when we're doing something over and over again, we develop these really strong pathways. Whereas when we have another area that we're not really tapping into, eventually it gets weeded out. Our brain's goal is to survive. And so it will become the most efficient brain to do the things we want to do throughout our lives. And this formation is happening. It happens throughout our lives, but a lot of this growth and pruning happens sort of 0 to 19. And so it's happening now. It's happening for our kids now. As adults, we do more making connections. As children, we're growing more of these dendrites. So as I mentioned, there's this overproduction, way more cells and connections than can survive, and then it kind of does that sorting or weeding out. Some research would call that competitive elimination. When I'm working with the grade 9s and speaking with them, I'll say, if you just do the same thing over and over, I used to work in the public school and in some sort of more deprived or depressed areas. Well, if kids would go home there and go online or PlayStation or something for 5 or 6 hours in an evening, which many of them would, certain pathways would be very strongly developed for those kids, and certain others would never get used, and therefore, in its survival mode, the brain would say, okay, we need to, prune out those areas. One of the things that I really appreciate from a brain research perspective about SMOO is that we say all kinds of things are valuable. You need to continue to take phys ed, you need to have some arts. We're continuing to develop all of those different pathways in our kids, and probably not many of your kids go home and do one thing at night for an extended period. They're doing a variety of things, and that's a really important thing as we talk about the development. The last part of our brain that's developed is the prefrontal cortex. That's the part right behind your forehead. When I'm doing with kids, I get them to, put their hands on the parts of their brain. The prefrontal cortex is like our CEO. It's like the, if I do this, then this will happen, part of our brain. And according to research, that's not fully matured in most of us until early to mid-20s. You may even know people for whom that's never matured. And so the reality of that is that we have kids, you know, that are getting bigger before our eyes, big feet, big bodies as they move through their teens, and still perhaps that part of their brain may not be fully functioning. It's not an excuse. Like, they can't go home and say to you, as one of my students, a parent told me, one of my students came home and said, no, my prefrontal cortex is not developed, so you can't really hold me accountable for that. No, that's not what we're advocating. But I think understanding what's going on developmentally, I think, is really an important position for us as parents. I'm going to just digress slightly, because one of the things that's really interesting to note is that these pathways, while kids learn and do things through the day, there's little protein markers that are put on their brains, but the actual development of these dendrites and pathways happens while they sleep. I don't know if this is your experience as a parent, but if you can't see it, Mom is calling, Jeremy, time to get up, all sort of sing-songy, and then it's 7:15, and then it's getting more intense, rise and shine, let's go, and she bashes in the door and screams, get up. And then he says in the car, I don't mean to be critical, but if you'd get me up earlier, we wouldn't have to race to school like this every day. Yeah, for me, I'm pulling over to the side of the road and say, have a nice walk at that moment. But this reality, for some of us who are, and I noticed there are some senior school folks here and even middle school, as kids move into adolescence, the chemical melatonin that helps us ready ourselves for sleep can be delayed up to about 2 hours to be released. And so you have these kids, I don't know if you've noticed, but the kids are sure noticing as I talk to them, they're having a harder and harder time falling asleep at night, and really tricky times in some of the mornings. And so, you know, we want to be conscious, I think, as parents about the sleep piece. I know when I was learning this a few years ago, and I had all 3 kids at home, 2 are gone now, and we'd sit at the table and I would say, you need X amount of sleep. How much sleep do you think sort of an adolescent might need? Any guesses? 9? 12. I'll show you. So the chart is up there. Yeah, this is from the Mind, Brain, and Education Science book, fairly recent research. So I would sit with my kids at the table and I would say, we're not going to do the bedtime negotiation, but how are you going to get your 9 hours sleep? If you have a practice at 7 tomorrow morning, you know, and they would say, please stop doing that brain research stuff. It's really, you know, but that is, those are the hours of sleep. And when I'm working with kids in the grade 9 HC and I'm saying, put your hand up, I didn't see many who were getting 9 hours sleep. Many of them were in the 7, 8 range, some of them in 6. And so it's just something for us as parents to notice that if we want our kids to really be as refreshed as they can. The other thing is, I don't know if your students are doing this, but students who stay up and study all night, like pull all-nighters before a test, versus students who sleep before the test. If you know now that the learning is wired in as you sleep, it's really important to get some sleep before a test. So if your kids are saying, I didn't get to this, I've got to stay up really late, you need to put some decent sleep time into it.